Hello, and thank you very much indeed for watching and downloading. My name is David Ross and I'm the CEO for Europe, Middle East, Africa and Asia of WPP, the Store. We have, over the course of the last 6 and 7 months, looked at many different aspects of the recession and how that's impacting both retailers and brand owners. We have launched a playbook which looks at what we consider to be a 3-act play in terms of how the recession is going to play out. What we are now seeing is the way in which many retailers and brand owners have started to develop their strategies in terms of their communication and their promotional activity in order to attract and retain both existing customers and new customers. And we're going to spend the next 20 minutes or so looking at some of those strategies, and indeed probably much more interesting for most of you, looking at some of the executions of those strategies. And to help us navigate our way through this, I am joined by Will Galgi, who's the Managing Director of the Futures Company, which was formed last year with the merger of the Handy Centre, Headlight Vision and Yankovic. Will, a very warm welcome, thanks very much indeed.
Thanks very much.
It's been an interesting ride over the course of the last few months. Many of the acknowledged and established ways of doing things have been turned on their head. And both retailers and manufacturers have been forced into looking at the way in which they adapt and develop their propositions in a slightly different way. And you've done some very interesting, innovative thinking in this area, and we're going to explore some of those and look at some of the executions that many retailers have deployed around the world.
Sure. Absolutely.
I think maybe it's best to start, Will, by just looking at how consumers' sentiment has changed during the course of the build-up of this recession. It came, in a sense, from nowhere.
Sure.
Markets were growing very fast, consumers seemed to have an unending supply of money in their wallets, and then the train literally hit the buffers. And not only did the city and the institutions get a shock, but consumers got a big shock too. So what have you seen from the beginning of that period to where we currently are at the moment?
Yeah. Well, interestingly, we did set out to track levels of consumer anxiety in relation to what was happening in the economy, and we started to do that in the third quarter of last year. And what we've seen over the course of the last 6 months or so is some very interesting and subtle shifts in how consumers are feeling about what's happening in the economy and how it's affecting them personally. So what we've seen in particular is there's been a bit of a shift from a state of mind towards the end of last year where people were really, as you say, very much in shock with relation to what was happening in the economy, and we saw very high levels of anxiety amongst consumers. And what we've seen more recently is that actually those levels of anxiety have actually started to subside a little bit, particularly in the US and the UK. And
does this mean it's over? Or?
No, not at all. I think what's happened is, on the one hand, people certainly are more aware of the situation and have a better understanding of the situation today. So their concerns around the big picture in terms of the macroeconomy have actually kind of worsened. But in terms of short-term affordability and their kind of immediate pressures around their household budget, we've actually seen a kind of easing of anxiety around that over the last 6 months or so. And our rationale for that is that what we've essentially seen is that people have learned to cope with the recession in many ways, and we're over the initial shock and trauma that we had towards the end of last year, and we're now in a state where people have figured out ways to kind of manage their way through, and they've adapted their lifestyles, and consequently feeling more comfortable about their ability to kind of in effect to survive the recession.
So anxiety has relaxed a little bit, but are consumers still worried of the bigger type of picture, which is, I suppose, employment or unemployment is probably the biggest issue that most consumers have? Has that anxiety eased on whether they are going to be made redundant, or are they still very anxious about that sort of employment situation?
Sure. In effect, what's happened is anxiety has kind of shifted from being around kind of short-term concerns around, as I said, affordability in particular, to longer-term concerns around their own financial security. So whether that be concerns about unemployment, which have most definitely increased, but also people's concerns about their ability to kind of fund their retirement and kind of to be able to kind of manage their finances in the longer term. So there has been an increase in unemployment, obviously, and many people now report that they're aware of people who have been made redundant, who have lost their jobs, and that is affecting people very directly.
So people are slightly less anxious on the everyday aspects of being able to afford food and products for their family. I suppose some of that is due to the fact that, in a sense, commodity prices have reduced as well, so the household bills could be less, together
Absolutely.
with the actions that a lot of retailers are taking to promote value-type products as well. People are much more concerned about unemployment because they're seeing it as real. Some of their friends have been made unemployed. What strategies have you seen consumers start to adapt in order to cope with this next stage?
Yeah. The way we kind of see it, we see that consumers have essentially 4 underlying needs that are particularly key in driving their behaviour in the current context. The first that we've kind of touched on already is this need to be able to cope. So they're looking for strategies that allow them to help and enable them to kind of make their money go further. The second strategy is around the kind of need to retreat. So we see consumers on many different levels kind of retreating to what's safe and familiar for them, whether that be spending more time at home, whether that be retreating to brands that they feel they have more of a kind of historical connection with and a greater level of trust. Or generally speaking, their kind of levels of trust shifting towards more local institutions, so local stores on their high street, for example, where they feel they have a greater sense of connection, and as I said, kind of trust kind of being a kind of key currency in the current climate. And the third kind of core strategy is around the desire, in a sense, to escape and to kind of shift away from what's happening and take a moment to be able to kind of forget their worries and to really inject a little bit of luxury back into their lives. And the fourth and final strategy is that consumers are looking to underwrite risk. So any high ticket purchases that they're making, they're looking for ways to really manage their risk around those, to ensure that it's not going to be something that comes back to bite them if they find themselves less well off in the months to come.
And you also have a very interesting thought about the way in which consumers relate to those 4 items and have, I suppose, in your terminology, have mental wallets in their heads that they wander around stores with, dividing the expenditure that they've got between those items. How does that work?
Yeah. We've done quite a lot of work to try and understand the different trade-offs that consumers are making, and what we find is that there are essentially 4 mental wallets that consumers have in terms of the expenditure that they make. So the first of these is their kind of basic expenditure, which relates typically to their kind of household shop on a kind of weekly basis. The second is what we call their sanity expenditure, which relates to typically kind of small ticket items that people might buy just to kind of make their day a little bit more pleasurable. So it could be a Starbucks on the way to work, it could be a kind of Sunday newspaper, typically small things that people kind of really value as part of their day-to-day lives. The third wallet is what we refer to as lifestyle spending, which in effect is spending on items that people perceive to be much more core to their lifestyle. So for some people that might be their gym membership, for example. For other people it could be their pay TV subscription. Typically things that people really kind of value and considered to be absolutely kind of core to their identity. And then the fourth wallet is the kind of truly indulgent spending, and for people this might be, for example, going on holiday or eating out in nice restaurants, that kind of thing. And the general pattern that we've seen is that people have been looking to kind of reduce their spending in the basic wallet and to reduce their spending in the indulgent wallet so that they can protect that spending on the kind of sanity purchases and the lifestyle purchases. So it is very much about kind of protecting those things that are most important to you, both in terms of your identity and your lifestyle. And clearly, the implication of that is that those categories and brands that are positioned in consumers' minds in those sanity or lifestyle wallets are kind of much better positioned to kind of ride out the recession.
So the key is to be positioned then, and clearly not in the indulgent sector.
Absolutely, and of course, the reality is that for different consumers and different consumer typologies, different categories will fall into those different buckets. So you need to understand, in relation to your specific target audience, how your categories are perceived. But clearly within categories as well, there will be brands that will be, certainly more in the kind of basic end versus those that are much more seen in the kind of sanity or kind of lifestyle end of the spectrum as well. So it's all about how you position yourself relative to the competition in consumers' minds in order that they might want to protect their spending on your brand.
So that's the strategies. Now we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at both retailers and brand owners' responses to that in 4 areas. Looking at budgeting made simple, so how retailers are making consumers' money go significantly further than it did in the past. Looking at retreat, so how retailers are returning to some of their roots and manufacturers to establish a great deal of credibility in their brands and their propositions. Escape, making consumers feel like although they are trading down to save money, they're actually trading up, and that's a great trick if you can manage to pull it off, and we've got some really good examples of how people are actually doing that. And finally, underwriting risk. We are all in this together, and those consumers and brand owners and retailers that can manage that together and be seen as a partnership, again, as a strategy for both growth and also for brand building.